talking about ancient Chinese books.
Civilization represents the progress of human beings. Since written words were first used, human knowledge has been accumulated, and human wisdom has been inherited constantly. As the main carrier of written words, books are the foundation in delivering civilization. In the past 5,000 years, the formality of written characters and books has evolved several times. Over such a long period in Chinese history, how were characters gradually developed from scratch, and recording materials advanced from cord, stone, bamboo, and wooden slips into delicate paper.
Also, how did the layout of books and the bookbinding technique proceed from ancient times to the present? Now, let's follow Confucius on a historical journey about ancient books.
In the beginning, human beings could only deliver messages orally. Later on, in order to memorize things easily, people used drafting, tying knots, and even carving on wood for recording events. It is said that in ancient times, Zhang Jie, the officer of Huangdi, was in charge of tying knots to mark down events. He tied a big knot if an important event happened, while he tied a small one instead after a common tiny thing came about. However, as time went by, it was not exact and precise enough to recall every detail from knots. Therefore, Zhang Jie, the man with 2 pupils and 4 eyes, penetrated sharply all things on earth, including the behavior of animals, the patterns of mountains, rivers, and all creatures, to create characters. Afterwards, characters were carved on various objects, such as pottery, tortoise shell, and animal bone, which were all used as recording materials accordingly. In China, the initial characters were from the Shang dynasty, shown on the oracle bones in order to foretell the future. Meanwhile, bronze was for recording objects, which people not only used as utensils, but also used to demonstrate authority and power. Bronze objects with inscriptions by then had already served to function as books.
Before the invention of paper, or say, before paper was in popular use, bamboo, wood, even silk and textiles were the main materials for writing in an early phase. Bamboo and wooden slips, which were cut into narrow strips first, were then bound together. Words were written down on the wooden slips, and they became the earliest and oldest form of books in ancient China.
Whereas printing techniques had not been invented yet, people could only make transcriptions by hand to circulate books. More and more, mistakes happened unavoidably during the transcription process.
Accordingly, the imperial government set up stele in front of the imperial school with the standard inscriptions on it for people to follow. The Xiping stone classics were the earliest official edition of Confucian classics on stele. Afterwards, the streets in Luoyang were packed with plenty of intellectuals visiting and duplicating the inscriptions.
In the Eastern Han Dynasty, Cai Lun demonstrated the paper he produced to Emperor Han He and made it known to the public. The paper was then called Marquis Cai's paper throughout history. After that, people gradually followed his method of duplication. In the final years of Eastern Qing Dynasty, instead of slips and silks, paper became the most common and universal carrier for writing.
Well, when the printing technique was invented, do you know how books were printed out?
I have no idea.
I know.
Then it's your turn to tell us.
In the Tang Dynasty, people had already made use of woodblock printing to make books. The made-up ones were called block-printed editions. While usually being practiced in the sutra in the Tang Dynasty, woodblock printing technique was widely used for assorted documents in the Song Dynasty. Among all block-printed editions, the editions from the Song Dynasty were the most exquisite and delicate ones.
But it was quite tedious to engrave word by word, wasn't it?
Sure it was, and it took a long time to finish only one book by wood engraving. Thus, during the years of Qing Li in North Song Dynasty, Bi Sheng invented the Chinese movable type printing technology by using fine clay. The invention accelerated the printing process and was, in theory, basically the same as lead movable typography in the modern age.
But these books were printed only in black. Were there any colorful ones?
Of course there were. In order to distinguish the contents from the images, multiple colors were accordingly printed in the same frame. In the Ming Dynasty, the Douban printing technique, which was invented by Hu Zhengyan in the years of Wan Li, was chromatographically implemented with different frames and pigments, enriching the appearance of paper copies in various colors. It was a significant innovation in color printing.
Very good. That is a great description. Well, we've talked about written words, paper, and printing techniques, but do you know anything about the evolution of bookbinding and layout of ancient books?
I have no idea how it worked. Please kindly tell us.
There are numerous ancient books and layouts with assorted binding styles in the傅斯年 library. Let's take a look together.
Based on how wooden slips and silk texts were rolled, the scroll form, also known as the roll, was the earliest form of the binding and layout of paper books. A very good example is the Dunhuang scroll. Even now, people still use the scroll form when mounting calligraphy and paintings.
In ancient India, the Buddhist sutra was recorded on patra, palm leaves, called patra leaf manuscripts, which were taken back by the well-known Buddhist monk Xuanzang from India in the Tang Dynasty. After it was introduced to China, paper was substituted for leaves. Piling together all the written papers, people put wooden boards or pasteboards as front and back covers, and wrapped them up together with ropes. Because the manuscripts were written in Sanskrit initially, they were given the name Fanjiazhuang, Sanskrit clipping form.
Grandpa Confucius, it seems that these two forms of binding, scrolling and clipping, are not convenient for reading.
Yes, it does. To mainly improve reading condition, so-called Jingzhe bound, also well known as the folding bound, was then developed. It was usually shown through Buddhist sutras and Taoist texts. How the folding bound worked was to stick paper edges one after another into a strip sheet, and then fold it up left and right into several pages. Lastly, attaching wooden boards or pasteboards as front and back covers.
Well, Look, something weird is in this book. There is a blank space in between.
Let me see. You're right. Is there anything wrong with the printing?
This is what you don't understand. Just let me explain it. This is the so-called butterfly bound, which was the main binding method of books in Song and Yuan dynasties. Right before the books were bound, the layouts were first folded with the written or printed part inside, and the middle of the layouts were piled up together along with the spine. You can see the completely blank part between the book leaves. When flipping through the books, book leaves would similarly look like the opened-out wings of a butterfly.
Wow, it truly looks like a flying butterfly.
But isn't it quite inconvenient to turn the pages in a book?
Definitely, it is. We can see the wrap-up binding style used later on. It looked the same in appearance as the butterfly bound, yet in another type of folding. The written or printed parts were folded outside, while the middle of the layouts were against the spine. Without blank parts, people could flip through books more consistently and keep reading more conveniently in comparison with the butterfly bound. As books in wrap-up bound easily come apart, people made use of punching and then threading to practice binding up the spine. Thus, they became thread-bound books. Furthermore, it was better off eliminating both the inconvenience of turning over the butterfly bound and the problem of wrap-up bound falling apart too easily. The thread-bound form grew into the main method of bookbinding after the Song and Yuan dynasties.
We thank Confucius for telling us the history of books.
Moreover, it's such a precious lesson.
The maintenance and preservation of books is also an important job. As such, the ancient books in the傅斯年library are protected under constant temperature and humidity, and the mounting room serves as a treatment space for repairing books. Ancient books carry out the passing along and inheriting of civilization. We hope everyone will perceive the value of books, love books, and cherish books, so that civilization can be deeply embedded in our minds. In addition, culture will be effectively transported from generation to generation forever and ever.